Hey, what's going on, everybody? Commander Crane here, and we are back with another Pioneer deck tech. And today we're going to be talking about Mono Black Shadow. Yes, Mono Black Death Shadow in Pioneer. Although we're not specifically playing Death Shadow, we're playing a card that basically is Death Shadow. But before we hop into the video, I have to always mention, let me know in the comment section below at the end of the video, what do you think about the deck? Is there a specific card that I should have put in this deck that I did not? Or do you have suggestions for upcoming videos? Just let me know in the comment section. And then the last thing I have to mention before we hop into the actual deck here is we are currently on the road to 1,000 subscribers. And if you want to be a part of the huge giveaway that's going to be happening once we get there, you're going to want to be subscribed to the channel, so that way you'll be notified as soon as that giveaway happens. And one of the requirements to be able to be entered into the giveaway is to be subscribed to the channel. So if you have not, you might as well subscribe to the channel, so that way you'll be notified as soon as we get to 1,000 subscribers. Okay, let's go and hop into the actual video here. So unsurprisingly, for those who have been paying attention to Aether Drift, the reason I built this deck is the Last Ride. It's a 13/13 vehicle for 1 black mana, but it gets -X/-X, where X is your life total, so essentially a Death Shadow. But then for 2 and a black, you pay 2 life and draw a card, and then it has Crew 2, which Crew 2 is really not bad at all. And I've been wanting to do a Death Shadow deck for Pioneer for quite some time, and then we got the Last Ride, and I already had the perfect shell to be able to make this deck happen. So I'm really excited that I waited to actually post this, as well as the fact that we can play Death Shadow basically in Pioneer, although it does look a lot different than the regular Death Shadow decks that we're used to, just because in Modern, we had cards like, Thought Scour to help with Gurmag Angler and Tasigur, and then we had Fetch Lands in conjunction with Shock Lands and Street Wraith, so it looks a little bit different, but I still think this deck is pretty solid in its own right. So let's go and hop into the rest of it here. So creatures. We're playing 16 creatures. The nice thing is all of these creatures have the potential to be able to crew the Last Ride. So let's go and take a look at them. So I'm playing 4 copies of Caustic Bronco. This is the card I was most excited to honestly play in this deck. What's nice with it is if we do attack, obviously it does have the option in terms of, for us, taking damage if we don't saddle it, but if we're toward the late game, we have a couple creatures in play, and we want to be able to get some damage in, we can just go ahead and saddle the Caustic Bronco to be able to do some extra damage. I'm also not playing, actually, I'll talk about it in the next slide. There's a card I'm not playing because of Caustic Bronco, which will make sense in just a moment here, but we're also playing 2 copies of Misery Shadow. I just really like this card. Again, it's another 2-power creature that's able to crew our Last Ride, and it's just a really nice effect. And then we're also playing 3 copies of Tenacious Underdog. I've always really liked this card. The Blitz cost is really solid. It does help grow our Last Ride a little bit, and it's just a solid creature in its own right. So definitely a huge fan of the Tenacious Underdog. And then rounding out our creatures, we're playing 4 copies of Scourge of the Skyclaves. That means we get 4 Last Ride and 4 Scourge of the Skyclaves for a total of basically 8 Death Shadows in the deck. And then we're also playing 3 copies of Gix Yawgmoth Praetor, because I just really like this card. I was trying to find a card that would let us draw cards and lose a little bit of life, and I think Gix is the perfect option for this deck, just because we are, after all, playing a lot of creatures. The card I have to mention, though, is Shadow of Morality. I'm not playing that one in this deck pretty much just because of the Caustic Bronco. I think the Bronco's really good in this deck, and if we, attack and then we just dome ourselves for, I think it's like 10 or something like that, then it's just, we're dead. We're pretty much just dead. So that's the reason I did not include that in this deck, but I still think having the 4 copies of Scourge of the Skyclave, as well as the 4 copies of the Last Ride, which are legendary, I think it's a good number to have in this deck overall. So those are all the creatures that we're playing. We have to talk about the interaction. We're playing a ton of it because, after all, we are mono black. So let's go and hop into it. So 4 copies of Fatal Push. Unsurprising, the card's fantastic. We're also playing 4 copies of Sheoldred's Edict. It's just a really good removal spell in the format. And then we're also playing 2 copies of Bitter Triumph. I thought about playing 4 copies of Bitter Triumph, but I decided to just play 2 copies. I do like it just because we have the option to pay 3 life, which once again makes our the Last Ride a little bit bigger. The nice thing is, too, is if the spell is countered, or like the target becomes invalid for some reason, we still have to pay the life in addition to the cost. So we do lose the life no matter what, which is really nice with Bitter Triumph. But we're also playing 4 copies of Thoughtseize, which once again, we lose life, which it works really well with the Last Ride. And then we're also playing 4 copies of Sign in Blood. I wanted a draw spell, And I kind of figured, hey, we draw cards, we lose a little bit of life, it just kind of fits the deck really, really well. So that's why I'm playing the 4 copies of Sign in Blood in the deck. Is there a better one? I mean, arguably, yeah, but I wanted something for only 2 mana that was pretty cheap. So I do like the Sign in Blood in the deck overall. So that's the entire main board, except for the lands we have to talk about, which we're mono black. It's a pretty simple mana base. We're playing 22 lands. So we're playing 4 copies of Hive of the Eye Tyrant and 2 copies of Castle Locthwain as our main mono black utility lands. I am playing 4 copies of Sunken Citadel. We're not trying to curve out in this deck. The nice thing is it's spend this mana only to activate abilities of land sources, but we do have Castle Locthwain and Hive of the Eye Tyrant, because we're kind of like a mono black aggro deck in a way. It's like a pseudo aggro deck, but I do like the Sunken Citadel to help activate Hive and Castle Locthwain. But we're also playing 4 copies of Field of Ruin and 1 copy of Takenuma, so we have multiple things we can use the Sunken Citadel for. And I mean, hey, if we get 2 of those in play, all of a sudden we're activating our Hive of the Eye Tyrant for basically only 2 mana, which is pretty good. So I do like the Sunken Citadels in this deck in general, and then obviously Field of Ruin and Takenuma is fantastic along with that. And then rounding out our lands, we're playing 1 copy of Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth, and 6 Swamps. And as our spicy basic land of the day, I know I've been talking about this so much just because it feels like I've been building so many black decks, at least in regards to cards from Aether Drift, and I really love this swamp. It reminds me of Need for Speed a little bit. Overall, I do like the basics from this set. I think they're pretty cool, and definitely the swamp is my favorite of the bunch. So don't go anywhere yet though. We still have to talk about our sideboard as well as some budget options for the deck. So sideboarding is going to be relatively straightforward in terms of the cards we're going to put in the sideboard, but I do like to mention, as always, if your sideboard looks a little bit different in terms of what you think you should play, or if you do have this deck, if you build this one, or if something's similar and it looks different, that's fine. Your local metagame looks different, or maybe you run into different decks more often on Arena. If you want to go ahead and change up the sideboard, feel free. This is in no means like the locked-in sideboard you have to play for this deck. But let's go and hop into here. Okay, so we're playing 2 copies of Duress. Duress is Duress, and it's absolutely fantastic. We're also playing 2 copies of Cut Down as another 1-mana removal spell. We're also playing 2 copies of Path of Peril. We're never going to cleave this unless we play the Sunken Citadel on white, which, I mean, I guess, like, maybe late game, if you board in your Path of Perils and, like, you have an extra copy of Sunken Citadel, maybe keep that in mind, I guess. It's, again, not something that's probably going to happen very often, but Path of Peril is still good in its own right. We're also playing 2 copies of Invoke Despair and 1 copy of Liliana the Veil, both just fantastic black cards out of the sideboard. And then rounding out our sideboard, we're playing 2 copies of Damping Sphere just because it's absolutely fantastic in the metagame, and then 4 copies of Leyline of the Void for those darn pesky graveyard decks. Do keep in mind, though, if you do bring in the Leyline of the Voids, be careful with Caustic Bronco. If you're a little low on life total and it's not saddled, you don't want to accidentally deal yourself 4 with the Leyline of the Void. So do keep that in mind with this deck, as well as the Invoke Despair, I guess, as well. Okay, so the last thing we have to talk about is the budget options for this deck, which is pretty straightforward. Play some more basic lands. You don't need to play all of those mono black utility lands that are relatively pricey. You don't have to play them. Just go ahead and play a few extra swamps. And then you can also go ahead and swap out Thoughtseize and Gix. I think Gix is really, really good in the deck. I originally was playing Phyrexian Arena in the deck, but I wanted card draw that wasn't always consistent like that, just because when we start getting low on life total, we don't want our Phyrexian Arena to start accidentally, taking us out of the game. So that's kind of why I like Gix. It's more just like self-regulated. We can draw cards whenever we deal damage kind of thing. So I don't know. But then Thoughtseize, obviously, just go ahead and put in for Duress. Thoughtseize is absolutely fantastic for this deck, though just keep in mind if you don't have them and you want to play the budget version of the deck. But the current list, as it's constructed right now, it's only $181 US, which it's not surprising in the sense that most of the expensive decks in the format typically are, 2-color decks, and this is just a monocolor deck, so it makes sense why it is cheap. But I was able to get the budget list down to $47 US, just because there's a lot of cards in this deck that are pricey and they're very good. Obviously, like Urborg is $45 US a piece for 1 Urborg, and then it just kind of goes from there. Like the Gixes are relatively pricey just because it's a pretty popular commander card, as well as a pretty solid card in standard. But overall, I really love this deck. I guess it's our second rendition of like making old modern decks that used to be a thing, like kind of converting them to Pioneer a little bit, because we recently did just do Rakdos Hollow one, which you haven't checked out that deck, you definitely should. But overall, I really love this deck. I'm going to be trying this on Magic Arena sometime. I have pretty much all these cards for the most part, except for the last ride. Just got to use a couple of Mythic Wild cards and go ahead and play this deck. But overall, I think it's super fun. Let me know in the comment section below what you think about the last ride, or also let me know if you have a deck similar to this, and definitely let me know how it plays for you. So that takes us to the end of the video. Thanks so much for watching. The deck lists are in the description below if you'd like to check them out for yourself. Huge shout out to our channel members, Ralph, Matt, Arcadius, Ray, Gary, and Sir Winoki. If you're interested in being a channel member, it's only $1 a month, and you get access to the exclusive Commander Crane Discord, as well as other features here on the channel. So, I'm Commander Crane. Thanks for watching this video, and I hope to catch you in the next one.